Hi, I'm Michael Delamere, the president of panelist Solutions. Today we're here to discuss the power of empathy. The reason we started this presentation or came up with this as a topic is it doesn't get discussed enough today in our industry or profession. It's something that we believe needs to be brought to the forefront and enhance in our awareness and our training. So we hope you enjoy this presentation and look forward to hearing your feedback and further contributions. Thank you.
So welcome. Thank you for joining us, those of you who are live this morning with us. And for those who might be viewing later on down the road, good afternoon or good evening, whenever you may be watching the recording. Today we're here to talk about the power of empathy. And on our panel here today, we've got myself as the moderator and the host of today's session. Michael Delamere, for those of you who may not know me, I'm the president of Premier Risk Solutions. We are a global corporate risk management firm assisting with a lot of private security and investigative matters. We have with us today the folks you see on the screen. I'm going to give them a moment to introduce themselves as well. We are going to start with Tim. Tim and I have worked together now for almost a couple of years, and it's been a great partnership. And Tim, I'm thankful to have you here today to share your experiences. Why don't you kind of share everybody a little bit about your background?
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Yeah, I spent most of my career, well, all of my career in the multinational high-tech community at Silicon Valley, companies like Cisco and NetApp and Oracle. Started off in contract manufacturing, Selectron, which is now Flextronics, and have enjoyed different cultural environments, from the very large Cisco, Oracle environments to the very small startup environments, different cultures, different environments. It's a lot of fun. Currently now with ROKU, a new experience for me, dealing with the customers and the public. But it's a lot of fun, very exciting, and enjoying the challenges.
And you're a company on the rise as well, out in the marketplace. So a well-branded name that I think folks probably recognize for their own homes. I know I do. Thanks, Tim.
Sure.
Let's kick it over to Rich. Rich and I have known each other for the better part of a decade now. And Rich, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. Rich Cinfio, did 30 years in law enforcement, 10 minutes from SFO. I saw one of our participants today is currently there, so know that area well. And retired at the command level. From there, I transitioned to Stanford University, where I helped co-champion their human behavioral threat assessment program, responding to threats, large-scale events, football games, those types of things. And then transitioned into healthcare for the last 10 years, healthcare security and emergency management, currently based out of Cincinnati, Ohio for TriHealth.
Hey, thanks a lot, Rich. Appreciate that. And certainly not least, we have Al Robinette with us, who is the president of CareerPath Consulting and Development. And Al and I have worked together for a good solid decade as well. Al, why don't you go ahead and give a little bit about your background?
Well, thanks, Mike. So I'm Al Robinette with CareerPath, and my background has really been in the private security sector with corporate asset protection and retail loss prevention industries. And then my focus has been in industrial organizational psychology, which is a lot of where Mike and I have worked together recently through my company, focusing on talent selection and development. So I really have a passion around the science behind people. Absolutely.
Hey, thanks a lot, Al. And today we're here to cover this as an agenda. We're going to discuss what empathy is, also what it is not, why it matters more today, some of the benefits you can gain from enhanced empathy skills, its real world application. We're going to talk about some case study examples from our collective experiences, some empathy tips and strategies, give you some opportunities on resources to further develop those skills, and then discuss some of the long-term rewards. And finally, we'll end the session with a Q&A. We'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes on the back end for any of your questions or situational points that you might like to discuss and have our panelists weigh in on as well. So that's the agenda for the presentation today. Most importantly, we want to highlight why it matters more today. It's always mattered, and it always will matter, but it matters a little bit more today because of the pretense that we're living in and under. We have the national pandemic, COVID, which has been thrust upon us earlier this year, which has led to a lot of economic stresses, uncertainties, where things are going, forced job separations, layoffs, so on and so forth, political turmoil, the protests, the violence that have resulted from some of those, the civil community unrest that you see through all of the folks that are out in the communities and the city centers, generally speaking, trying to voice their concerns over what their political agendas might be. Narrowing of business margins. Rich, I think this was one of the topics that you brought up, perhaps where organizations are in a position where it might be best to partner with some team members to keep them instead of laying them off or something along those lines to avoid, shortages, overtimes for the people who do remain as well. So anything else you want to add to that, Rich?
Yes, thank you, Mike. I'm north of 60, so I've been around for a little while. And I can say that in my lifetime, I've never experienced, and I'm sure like everyone else in the country, the amount of overwhelming stress, business challenges, people challenges. Simply put, it's an uncertain future. And I've found in my experiences that people become highly demotivated when there's an uncertain future, whether there's rumors of layoffs, and now we have the situation with pandemic, the election, economic challenges that is really gripping the entire country. I don't think that's an exaggeration to say that. So because of all this, while some businesses have thrived, most have significantly narrow business margins than what they were experiencing last year. So this brings out a set of challenges for leaders in the organization. And what I've found in my own business that I work in is that empathy goes a long way in connecting people to each other, to the company, reassuring them that this will work out. And, quite frankly, some people are concerned about just simply paying bills and putting food on the table. So empathy can be used as a gateway into employee engagement. We know that traditional office space is shrinking. My team is being moved myself, so I can speak with firsthand knowledge on that. We're moving away from bricks and mortar. Many people are working remotely, and that brings up its own set of challenges. Most communities with this transition to working remotely, and Ohio is no different, has experienced a significant increase in domestic violence because people naturally are spending more time at home. They're under duress. So there's been a significant spike in that. That also brings into play for the organization when we're working at home and we get threats. In healthcare, you can experience a lot of threats that come directly to employees because of the services they provide, billing, for example, or somebody's upset about the care that they received. That also brings home, literally from the workplace, a concern for safety. That too can have an impact on the employee. So how are we managing that? What kind of relationships and meetings are we having? How are we bringing connection and employee engagement into the home to help them better balance their other home responsibilities? Other challenges and layers, unfortunately, that come into play. I've been hearing it for the last 2 weeks since school came back into session. Significant lack of daycare availability, and in fact prohibited in many areas. Homeschooling, now kids are at home. It's no longer a distraction-free home environment to perform duties. So that could be an issue as well too. So the question becomes pandemic wave 3 is well underway now. For example, in the community I live in, Positive COVID is at an all-time high. The challenge for us is to work through the COVID fatigue, so to speak, and continue to engage our employees. And I believe sincerely that the best way to do that is through empathy, to identify, to put yourself in the shoes of the team members that we have together. Mike, and I know
thanks,
you've got more
Rich.
to add to that.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Al has done some research and found a study from Humana that provides some additional data points that kind of further why empathy matters more today too. So Al, why don't you kind of share some of those data points with us?
Absolutely. And I think when we look at, the current environment and what the future looks like, the uncertainties and all the different factors that impact a person from day to day, and both personally and professionally, there's a lot that people go through and experience in life. And when we think about it from just the workplace, Humana did a study that I thought was interesting, that 50% of workers have reported stress and anxiety that they believe affected their productivity. And 51% of the workers said that this same stress and anxiety affected the relationships with their coworkers. And that this was a number I thought was very telling. 60% of these individuals are afraid to talk to or report this to their boss or supervisor, that what they're experiencing or feeling. So if we think about the size of your teams, the size of your organizations, 6 out of 10 people are potentially experiencing some type of stress or anxiety, an emotional labor of some sort, and they're afraid to talk about it because of either they don't feel it's a safe environment, they're worried about retaliation or being seen as weak, or whatever the different reasons are validating reasons are, they choose not to come forward. It's not a safe place for them to express that. But if 50% of the organization is feeling this and it's affecting productivity and coworker relationships, that sounds like a pretty powerful statement to emphasize the importance as managers and even coworkers that we have to the overall health and productivity and the culture of the organization to create that safe environment. And empathy is one of those key soft skills that are most important to helping alleviate these stresses and anxieties.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good transition, I believe, into you kind of taking the definition of what is empathy and what is it not, additionally as well.
Absolutely. So empathy and sympathy get mixed and back and forth quite a bit sometimes when conversations. And I think the easiest way to explain the difference is sympathy is just acknowledging that there is an emotional distress, the person is going through something, where empathy is not only acknowledging it or picking up on it, but you're feeling it yourself, and that you're also taking actions to do something about it. I think one of the other things that empathy is not an excuse. So empathy does not relieve the person from accountability for their responsibilities. So we can have someone who is struggling or going through something. We can apply empathy to that, which I can feel for you, what you're going through. I've maybe experienced it myself. I'm having the same kind of feelings you are, the anxieties or the joy or the happiness or whatever that is. And I'm going to help you get through this. We're going to help you get to a better place. We're going to help you develop. We're going to help you get through whatever we need to for you to be where you need to be. But at the same token, that the individual still has an accountability for their day-to-day responsibilities. And I think sometimes there's confusion that if you apply empathy in the workplace, you're giving people a pass for their accountabilities, and that's not necessarily the case. You can still have that accountability there. But it's seeing it through the other person's eyes. It's seeing another person's perspective and feeling, like I said, what they're going through. And the next slide is where, we'll think about empathy also is no matter what definition you look up for empathy, because there's everything from the most complex scientific to the academic to the simplistic. But at the end of the day, empathy really comes down to 3 types of empathy. There's 3 elements to empathy. There's the cognitive, the emotional or affective, and the compassionate. And the cognitive is your ability to understand and sense that, hey, this person's experiencing something. Can you pick up on that? And that cognitive empathy is also very closely tied to emotional intelligence, which is one of the things I think many people are familiar with. If you're not familiar with EQ, it's definitely worth researching and developing your empathy. But it starts with the capacity just to sense how someone's feeling. Is this person happy? Is this person sad? Does this person feel frustrated? And then it transitions from, now that I've sensed that you're feeling this way, am I experiencing the same feelings? Can I feel that myself? Can I have that memory recall of that emotion where maybe I've experienced that myself or gone through it? And what does that feel like? And then the last part is, what are we doing about it? Are you taking action? Are you reacting to what that person is feeling and what they're going through? And one of the examples I used down here was a coworker that was going for a big promotion and they didn't get the job. So you can sense that person's feelings either through the body language or through their tone of voice or the words they use. You can sense that they're disappointed they didn't get it. But then the emotional empathy stage is, you might remember a time when you wanted a job and didn't get it, or you applied for something you really wanted, or you worked really hard to get a promotion and weren't the one picked. So you start to connect with that person on an emotional level. And then the last step is, okay, what can you do to help that person? Is it something you can do to help develop their skill set? Is there advice you can give them that somebody gave you potentially? Is there some type of action you can take that can help that person through what they're experiencing? And that's probably the most simplistic academic version I think I could come up with for kind of the stages of empathy. And when we think about empathy too, I use the picture at the bottom with the dog on the shoulder of the person, and I think anyone that's had pets tend to find a lot of pets are very empathetic. And, I think about it, dogs are very empathetic, and there's some studies that were done that actually shows dogs are very empathetic usually. But they can sense that you're sad or you're not feeling well, and comes and lays their head on your lap, and they're trying to express that they feel for you, and they're trying to make you and comfort you. And that's their action, is laying the head on the lap and trying to give you some attention. So even something as simplistic as that is showing all three stages through a pet, which I thought was an interesting example there. But empathy too, one of the things when we look at empathy of why people don't have empathy, I think that transitions into some of the barriers that people have to empathy. And on the slide here, we listed three main reasons that there's barriers to empathy: cognitive, victim blaming, and dehumanization. But there's another one that's very much debated, and it's the old nature versus nurture debate. How much of empathy is genetic, passed along from your parents, and how much of it is living your life, the community that you live in and everybody around you, and the combination of those two things kind of develop how empathetic you are. The Gallup Strength Finders has empathy as one of the 34 strength finders, if you've ever been through that. And empathy is one of the ones that's measured to see where you rank on your empathy scale. And everybody ranks different. There are people that will have empathy very high. There are people that will be empathy very low. And I think some of the empathy that you feel is part of the cognitive bias depends on the situation. If it's something that you connect with, it's something you've experienced, you're familiar with, you're more likely to potentially be empathetic to that situation. But if it's something you've never experienced, you've never been through, it can be a little bit more difficult to have empathy for that individual, because you don't necessarily know how they feel and you may not pick up on it as quickly. Victim blaming is something we do see in the workplace, unfortunately, a little bit more often than we would like. Victim blaming is where the individual is at fault for whatever's happening. It's that individual's fault that their project failed because they didn't do A, B, C, or D. Instead of stepping back and saying that's got to be a very tough situation that they're going through, I wonder what we could do to support that person. I wonder what happened, not understanding that this person maybe is dealing with a major health issue that nobody knew about, and that contributed to their performance. Or, maybe there's other factors that you're unaware of that contributed to the performance. So taking that step back instead of the blaming piece, to step back and say, I wonder, what happened? How could we support? And can we still help? Taking a different perspective. But we often see, especially when there's other individuals, that maybe there's a personality clash, that someone doesn't get along, someone maybe has a very strong ego, very strong personality, and they stumble or fail. Sometimes people will feel like, okay, they like to see someone fail sometimes, and that's a tough one to see happen out there. The dehumanization one is an interesting one, and Rich brought us a good example on this not too long ago, around the dehumanization is where someone steps back and they lose connection to the human element. So they start to look at individuals as subjects, as tools, and they take the human element out of that. So I don't see maybe Rich as being Rich, this great person on my team and has all these great skill sets. I look at Rich as just a tool in my toolbox to get this job done, and I don't connect with him on a personal, emotional level. And maybe I don't appreciate all the work that he goes through or what he does to get his job done. I'm looking strictly at the end result of what he produces. And it creates a very jaded relationship between Rich and I, for example. And then that can create a lot of opportunities in the workplace where performance and trust is not there and not built. Rich, I know you mentioned when we talked earlier that you had some experience with that in different industries where that might happen.
Yes, thank you for that. What comes to mind too, to add to that, is depending on the individual's background, if they're perceiving the issues that the other person is experiencing, if they feel it does not rise to the level of they themselves went through. Could be a veteran, for example, could be somebody who fought in combat, and they may take on the perception that anyone else who has not fought in combat or has suffered the personal tragedies that they themselves have suffered, they may not be worthy of empathy because it's not reaching their level of suffering. So that's really the antithesis to putting yourself in the other person's shoes. When you're focused on yourself, viewing the other person as not rising to the level of suffering you've had to go through and therefore not worthy of empathy. That really needs to be avoided if you want to make that connection.
No, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Rich. It's a great call out. And I think in today's world too, with a lot more people working from home, and a lot of the things that are going on within the home environment. I think Rich mentioned earlier some of the domestic violence things from people working at home because they're not able to leave the house, they're not able to report, they're not getting that break from each other. A lot of times it's easy for some individuals to step back and victim blame, to say, well, that's your fault that that's happening in your house. That's your fault that you're struggling with your kid's school. That's your fault that you don't have daycare. That's not our company's problem. That's not my problem. I have a job to get done. And then there's leaders that we've unfortunately seen that have that mindset out there. And so if you flip that around and put yourself into the other person's shoe and how they're hearing that message and how they're feeling, that's definitely not a message that creates that team environment and that long-term stability for retention and for the teams. So at the end of the day, just being aware that there are biases to how we respond to empathy, and taking steps to be more empathetic, to be more aware of other people's feelings and emotions, and be open to hearing what they have to share, and creating that psychological safe place is really important to helping move through that. And as we move forward in the rest of the slides, we're going to get into a lot more of the different strategies and things that are occurrences in real life where some of these things will apply. And the last thing I think I will share would be on the next slide. This is a really cool slide that psychotherapist Amy Morin put together. It's a list of empathy signs, and we'll provide the slideshow here for everybody if you don't get a chance to see through all this, because I know there's a good bit on this slide. But these are different signs about empathy to say, are you an empathetic person? Do people often tell you about their problems? Do they feel like you're approachable and they can come up and share what's going on with them, whether it's personal life or work life? Do you have the ability to pick up on other people's when they're suffering? Are you able to, do you deeply care about other people? Do people come to you for advice a lot? So these are all little different things that will say, if these things are happening within your workplace, you may be an empathetic person, whether you thought you were or not. And other people can sense that about you, and they're coming to you for that support. And you have created an environment that makes it open and comfortable for them to come to you and share those things, which is awesome. And if you haven't heard these things, that doesn't mean you can't develop this, because empathy is a skill. It's a skill that you can develop. It's a skill that you can practice. And as much as we talk about nature versus nurture, are you born to be more empathetic than others? Sure, some people probably are. But it's a skill nonetheless that you can develop and become better at. I will tell you from personal experience, empathy was one of my struggles. It was my number 34 out of 34 on Strength Finders many years back. And I took steps to try to work on my empathy to be better at it. So I can tell you that you can absolutely develop that skill set and become better at it. So if you don't see yourself on this list, don't worry, you can absolutely develop it.
Thanks, Al. Very good insights, as always, of course, to the behavioral aspect of things. At this point, we're going to ask Tim to chime in on some of the benefits that come out from practicing empathy. He has a lot of great experiences with that. So, Tim?
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. Yeah, this is, for me, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because it's really about all of the various ways that we can help teams and we can help people evolve and grow the business. And as an underlying foundation, the exercising of empathy skills and techniques and capabilities really establishes a trusting environment. And I start with trusting environment because once you have that relationship established with people, individual people, teams of people, cross-functional, it doesn't matter. When you set that foundation of trust, then it opens up the ability to be able to relate on a lot of different levels, whether it's driving engagement. People are now more inspired. They're dedicated and they're engaged to the effort. They're interested in what's happening and how they're evolving and how the business is growing because of the open communication, the establishing of trust, and the exercising of empathy with individuals and as a group. These techniques, they really fundamentally help the business. So when I talk about establishing trust in relationships and providing that opportunity for connection, I'm going to flip this and go to the other side of the coin with something that's negative, which is harassment in the work environment. But they talk about, when you harass somebody in the work environment, it isn't just harassing that individual, it's the person that also witnessed it and how they feel and how they're affected. Well, it's the same thing with exercising empathy skills and techniques. As you show empathy and as you connect with people and as you establish that trust, there are other people that sometimes might be in the room, other members of the team that might be aware of this. And through that osmosis, they're also receiving the benefit of that connection and the establishment of that relationship. And when you establish that trust, now people are free to express ideas and be more creative and more engaged and not, withdraw and be within. The last thing that I equate this to, and this completes the full circle of empathy, which is problem solving and conflict management. Now we talk a lot about, conflict and conflict between individuals and performance management and that type of thing. And I can tell you that when you start with establishing the relationship and the trusting relationship and you establish that foundation, then when it comes time to have difficult discussions, conflict discussions, maybe even a termination discussion, you can have that discussion in a more honest, open relationship. I can tell you from my own experience, I have had to terminate 2 people that I worked with for a long time because they made a mistake and they had to be terminated. And that relationship ended so well that both of them ended up being references for on my resume for new jobs. And so you can manage conflict. You can help people through challenges that maybe they don't see. And I'll give another example. We talk a lot about the team that's with us, and we talk a lot about how we manage team members. And if we think about what's a natural thing, what do we naturally do? The person that's been here the longest and has a track record and has demonstrated their abilities, we tend to give them more energy, if you will, than newer people that are trying to build their resume, if you will, with the team. Well, if you stop and think about it, there is a lot of pressure to do that. What's one of the biggest stressors in life besides the death in the family, the loss of a job, the changing of a job? And if you change a job, what do you do when you step into that new role? You're trying to impress everybody. You're trying to work as hard as you can. You're trying to overachieve. What if timing slaps you right upside the face and you have a major family crisis at the same time that you're trying to impress new employees and new people that you're working with? Well, if you have an empathetic boss who can understand that, it can help you through it, maybe a little bit of support on the front end. A year later or 2 years later down the road, you've got an overachieving employee that's doing fantastic because of the way you brought them into the company. So these are examples of how establishing that trust, can help drive engagement and drive creativity and evolve your business and grow it going forward. It can also help with problem solving, resolving conflict, and taking people through a problem and a challenge to a solution. So the relationship equation, I tend to be a math person and I like math. And so I think along the lines of math. And when I think about, myself, a lot like what Al was talking about, I'm not a feelings person. This is a management technique. It's a leadership style. It's something that you use and you use as a tool in your tool belt to be successful and help your teams be successful. And so in exercising this empathy and caring, and you add that to the inspiration and the motivation that you're generating through the way you behave with people and you lead them and the support that you provide them, and then out of that comes that honest, real, truthful communication all the time, whether it's good or bad, that leads to, as you exercise these techniques, you exercise them individually within your teams, you exercise them cross-functionally within the organization. Think about your relationships with HR and InfoSec and IT and marketing and just your general employee population. What are the relationships like cross-functionally? Are we always talking about challenges with, this group or that group? And then what about within the industry, even broader throughout the industry? By making the fundamental behaviors of caring and being empathetic across a lot of these different groups of people will result in evolution of the business, a trusting environment, a lot of engagement and growth of the organization, individuals, which is really an awesome thing to watch. Is when individuals are evolving and growing with the business. That is just that's the funnest thing you can experience as a leader. And of course, in these times, we're talking about understanding the impact that we're having on people, both in person as well as this virtual environment. Believe me, you can get on a virtual call and you can communicate with somebody in an empathetic, passionately emotional way that when you click off and you're not walking away, you click off your Zoom call, they feel better. They feel like they want to get busy and they want to get engaged with something. Believe me, these techniques and skills are transferable to any method of communication. It's just a matter of caring.
That brings up an image in my mind of one particular client that I have who insists on the camera being on in any Zoom meetings. And I know it's specifically because of the evolution and growth of that trusting relationship to see the face. Yeah. And to build that additional rapport. So I like it personally, but yes, to your point, I 100% agree that it does help tremendously with that.
Yeah, I would chime in and back and support that as well, because I will tell you that there's groups of people I interact with on a weekly basis that was always conference call based, but you don't see those individuals but a couple of times a year. That now that it's every week on video, that those relationships have absolutely flourished and there's a much closer connection and bond because you can see and you're actually getting that connection. So it definitely makes a big difference.
Next, I believe we're passing it over to Rich on the leadership capacity, on the power that leaders hold with empathy. Rich?
Yes, thank you. Tim, very well said. I'm going to do my best to add to it. Empathy really is a very powerful strategy, and it is, to me, effective leadership when we're talking about team engagement. At the end of the day, when you boil it all away, uncertain times, businesses facing the challenges that they're facing, it's really important to have the team execute at a high level. It's critical. Difficult times really mandate that we have optimum team performance. Really, it's one of the few ways that I know to get through a situation. I think part and parcel to that is when you make the connection through empathy. Right now, many people feel that the situation is not controllable. They may not have control over their personal lives or their relationships, their health, for example. Many people under my responsibility have had COVID in the last 6 months. And so when you really think about it, the one constant is that we have control over our jobs. And as a leader, if you use empathy as a gateway to connect with people and then spread that through the team, everything that we've talked about, trust, sticking together, a common vision, executing at a high level, controlling what we can control, focusing on the outcome and how best to get there to support people, then it really comes to light the importance of everything that we're talking about here. So it really does speak to effective leadership. You know, I have about 110 people that I'm responsible for, not overly large, but in healthcare, for those who may not know, it is the most dynamic and violent entity in the United States. Assaults on staff double every other profession you want to look at. In my own shop, we have armed security officers. That brings a different dynamic to it. So it's incumbent upon all of us when we're dealing with the respective dynamic environments we may find ourselves in to lead the way through empathy. And really at this point, it sets up an investment for future success. It helps us to retain people, for example. Nobody wants turnover. Nobody wants job reductions. We've had to go through some things ourselves, but the ability to find other jobs within the organization to make people whole, to do that as much as possible. Those who may not be able to carry on with the team will recognize the best effort. I believe, my own just futures forecasting, that when this thing resolves, and I'm hopeful after the first of the year, when it resolves, I believe the job market's going to become very competitive. And so if you maintain even those employees that may no longer be with the organization, if you maintain that relationship with them, it could make their return and onboarding much faster, which will make the organization much more nimble. As I spoke to, I could tell you in healthcare, empathy is a must. It's first and foremost a conflict resolution strategy. In fact, it avoids the number one complaint in most entities, and that is attitude. You know, studies show that 90% of complaints about a patient or a customer's experience has to do with attitude. It's well established that that has its roots in tone of voice, word usage, and body language. When you can mirror proper body language and sync your words with your thoughts using empathy as a powerful guideline, then that removes you from the middle, so to speak. You no longer become the object of the other person's anger. And so you can use that as a significant de-escalation tool and avoid having to do other things. You know, really, we all want a positive resolution. That's what we feel best about. Team continuity, I touched on already. Again, very important. It provides one message. It provides trust that the leader is not only looking out for the best interests of the organization, but they're looking out for the best interests of the team. And the one-on-one conversations and messaging that you can do under the empathy umbrella really promotes personal engagement. So if you have a large team, we know that you have your overall message and vision to the team and how you continue to message through difficult times. But you're reaching out and touching the one employee that's working on a Saturday night at 3 a.m. They feel like they're part of the team 24/7, and they feel like that you're on their side. And it's important to strike that balance. So therefore you get team continuity. And then again, providing one constant, a foundation for difficult times, vitally important. I believe, and I've felt it myself, that it's engagement, it's execution, and it's seeing this thing through to the end. And then how to manage afterwards. People will not forget what you did for them during these difficult times, and you're going to have a friend for life when you can reach out and touch them individually.
If I can jump in real quick, something you just said, Rich, that triggered for me was thinking about those difficult times, and something Tim mentioned before, there's times that there may be forced layoffs, workforce reductions, reorgs, and the empathy side of understanding that person's going through because their position's been eliminated. You're feeling the struggle that they're feeling through. But then that next step is, even though there's not a home in your organization for them, can you connect them to where there might be a home for them? Could that be that third step where you take that step to say, let me connect you with somebody. Let me pass you along to this organization. Hey, I know this great recruiter. Let me connect you. Hey, here's my LinkedIn network. Let me put something out for you. So again, that's all part of building that relationship with that person, looking at them as an individual and not as a tool for your company. You're building a long-term relationship that will benefit them and you for many, many years to come, hopefully, as you do that. But that's another example, Rich, you made me just think of.
Very good, Al. You're exactly right. Having somebody in their corner, being viewed as that person, is vitally important. Yes, great point. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and if you guys don't mind, I'd like to jump in with one other thought as well. I like to tell folks, I like to remind folks that what's one of the top reasons why people leave an organization or leave a team, and it's typically the relationship with their manager, relationship with the company, or relationship with people. It comes down to relationships, and what I have found is that, and people tell me I'm using the word fun wrong when I say this, but it becomes a more enjoyable, fun day if the relationships you have are positive and filled with trust. And so imagine, both as the leader and as a member of a team, coming to work every day and looking forward to the people that you're going to be interacting with, and having that whole day be more of a positive experience than a work day experience. I just think that is that's a critical benefit for us to keep in mind. Enjoying your day at work with the people you're with. This will really help contribute to that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think that's a pretty good transition point to talk about our next slide here, which is case study examples in real world applications. And so thanks for bringing that up, Tim. It's a apropos transition point. But what we've done is we've put kind of the case study examples, if you will, into these four verticals or buckets in supervision and leadership, safety and security, peer-to-peer de-escalation, and clients. So why don't we talk first about the supervision and leadership vertical. And Tim, why don't we start off with you? Want to share some of your examples throughout your career, how you practiced empathy or utilized empathy in supervision and leadership?
Sure, absolutely. For me, it has always boiled down to people. And I think it's because I had the benefit when I started off in my career of seeing both the really good leadership and the really bad leadership in the same organization. So it was crystal clear of what I wanted to be when I grew up as a manager and a leader. And once you start thinking that way, and once you start understanding the impact you have on people, it's a responsibility. And as a leader, we have to accept that responsibility and understand that when we're having a bad day, we don't get to put that off on our team. We don't get to share that with others. And so, when I talked earlier about driving engagement after you've established the trust, the investment in future productivity, what you're saying to the team is, I believe in your ideas as we go forward. I want your creativity. I want your engagement. Bring it to the table. Don't be afraid to say it, even if it's a dumb idea. Here, I'll give you a dumb idea first, and now you can come after me with whatever you want. And that human aspect of those relationships and that dialogue and the work that you then start doing together develops such a deep sense of loyalty and such a deep connection with one another that you have no choice but to build it, and it'll come out looking great.
And I think one of the things
Absolutely.
I was going to say, one of the things I think Tim just hit on that we didn't mention earlier was when you're saying bring out that idea, no matter what it is, that's one of the key elements of practicing empathy is don't judge. Don't judge a person for what they're going through. Don't judge them for their idea. Create that safe place for them to share. So great call out, Tim.
And I think this might be a good point to bring up as well, that empathy doesn't necessarily replace accountability. And when we talk about accountability, people still need to be held accountable for productivity. But I know we talked a little bit about that. Rich, do you want to kind of maybe talk a little bit more about that in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the boundary, so to speak, with empathy. It is really important to be empathetic, to listen, to influence somebody not at home, but to really try to influence themselves as an individual in life, regardless of where they're at in their life development. And I think it's important too to understand that two things can be true. You can have empathy, but also you need to uphold and address performance issues and uphold the standards of the organization. And when you do it that way, it makes people accept much more readily and in a calmer way the transition that they're about to go through. Mike, you want me to touch on safety and security?
Yeah, if you would, that'd be fantastic.
Okay, well, we know that we're in a pandemic. It's well established in our discussion today, the stressors that we've gone through, the layoffs and reduction in pay. We all have associates in the security and non-security worlds. For example, with the economic downturn, I know that investment companies have hired plainclothes armed security to sit in their lobby. In healthcare, well, before I get to that, we know if we're paying attention to the news, in Los Angeles, it was a Target store, I believe, where an employee asked somebody to wear their mask and they're stabbed. The sad, unfortunate incident is the dollar store in Detroit, where an individual asked to do the same thing and was shot and killed. The fact of the matter is that people in our country today are finding it very difficult to digest being told, no, you can't do something. And oftentimes they're reacting in aggressive ways. As noted earlier, domestic violence has increased. Certainly property damage due to civil unrest and demonstrations has been on the news regularly throughout the country. And then, as we talked about, personal and professional lives are intertwined. I think it's important too to remember that empathy is an outstanding de-escalation tool. And I will tell you, in healthcare in particular, and it should not be lost on us, in many professions, for example, when employees become concerned for their own safety, they may do things that violate policy. And I know in other professions that people have taken to, out of fear for their own safety, to arming themselves, for example. And we know that what can happen from there, accidental discharges and those types of things. So it's important to stay tuned 360 on what's taking place, look at it from inside out and outside in, and then using empathy to reassure staff and show leadership sensitivity.
So if I can jump in real quick here. So one of the things to add on to what Rich has shared around the safety and security, any organization that has a public-facing part of your organization, I think it's going to be important to remember, as we said, not everybody has empathy and everybody has it at different levels, and it is a skill set. So if you have an organization that has public-facing team members, what does that empathy look like on the front line? What does that look like with your customer, your client? And what strategies have been in place to help talk them through how to have those empathetic conversations on the things they may deal with. So, for example, Rich's example of the mask situation, what is the strategy that's been in place to help give them talking points and walk them through how to have that conversation from an empathetic way versus an enforcement, this is policy, do it or get out approach. To have that empathetic, hey, I know, hey, you might have forgot your mask in the car. I'd be happy to get you one kind of approach, and just being empathetic to what the person may be going through. Again, so just kind of anything that's got a public-facing aspect to an organization, that's an area I think sometimes may be forgotten, is to help train and teach that front line the empathy piece as well.
Well said, Al. Scripting.
Yep.
Vitally important to give the message ahead of time so there's time for understanding, question and answers, and then some training, some rehearsal before going out and interacting with the public. Great point. Thank you.
And Tim, I know you touched on a lot of the peer-to-peer from your experience when you mentioned that they were listed as references on the resume before, but perhaps you want to elaborate a little bit further in maybe even some other experiences in peer-to-peer de-escalation that you've had as well.
Yeah, so, it's interesting. I'll talk cross-functionally within the organization, because I think that that's a challenge that all of us have, and we don't talk about it enough, which is, how the heck are we going to get a positive connection with our HR partners? How the heck are we going to get marketing to put out the email we want put out, not the email they want put out, because they want it to look a certain way and we just want the content to be accurate. So you have these conflicts cross-functionally because people have their own agenda and their own objectives and their own priorities, and they're so immersed in their role with the company that they don't take the time to think about other roles and how does their role fit in with other roles and what are the connection points. And I'll be the first to admit that I can steamroll. I've got objectives and I want to get them done, and I want to get them done now. And I've had to learn how to back myself up a little bit and have that conversation with, why is this so important to you that it's this way? Have that conversation and really listen to it. It's not an empathetic technique. You're actually being more empathetic to yourself as you're trying to understand something you don't understand, so that you can come to an agreement and a resolution and move together cross-functionally more effectively. And I think that turning the skills on yourself can be as effective as using them on others.
Yeah, agreed. And Rich, I know I've seen it from you time and again over the last decade, but you've got plenty of experience in peer-to-peer de-escalation yourself as well. Anything additionally that you might like to add?
I think it's been summed up. I would just say that when you have peer-to-peer conflict, it really detracts from the overall mission. Like Tim, I'm driven as well for results. That's what we're expected to produce. And it's distracting, can be dangerous, especially when it's in a paramilitary environment, for lack of a better word. It's unsightly to the customer, certainly. And there needs to be zero tolerance for that. And I think by doing everything that we're talking about, it sets the foundation for preventing that or detecting it early on, and then we can resolve it. So you set the expectations moving forward. And as far as customers go, empathy, paraphrasing really are two powerful things. I provide this training to nurses and frontline workers all the time. When we reflect and give someone an opportunity to hear and feedback what they're saying, it allows them to perhaps reconsider, and the experience may not have as bad as it seemed. And it limits really to the facts, because these days when people are agitated, upset, emotional, in reality, they're focused on themselves. So simply put, if they're out in left field, it's not going to be advantageous to work with them from home plate. You're going to have to go out to left field, join them, and then guide them home.
Nice sports analogy. I like it.
Anything else, Tim, you might like to add to that particular category?
No, not really.
All right. Well, let's move along to as we're closing this presentation here in the next couple moments. Empathy tips and strategies. Al, why don't you go ahead and take this one?
Thanks, Mike. So what we put together, the bullet points, are just some quick tips. Like a little cheat sheet on practicing empathy every day. Take the time to listen. And this is one of the key things. When I say listen, I mean active listening, not distractive listening. So active listening means you put the iPhone down, you set everything aside, you turn away from the computer, you close the door if you need to, you go to a quiet place where there's no distractions maybe. Whatever it is, it's active listening. Distractive listening is more actually disrespectful, I think, when someone's trying to share or express things with you. I know we're all moving a million miles a minute, and just while we've been doing this, my phone's gone off with 17 different emails, and so we're all dealing with it. But giving your full attention to that individual and showing them that empathy and that respect, that your listening is important. Don't judge. That's a big one. So no matter what they're going through, no matter if that thought in your head goes, oh my God, how could you possibly think that that was a good idea? You don't say it. You don't judge. You let them explain, and then you help them through it. Tone of voice, body language are all important aspects of it. Thinking about and relating to the times that you may have experienced or been through the same thing is always helpful. And then, one of the key things, I think Rich or Tim brought this one up when we listed this, was, talking about what that relationship looks like moving forward. So if it is something where somebody has made a bad decision, there is some kind of accountability, just so there's clarity about, hey, there is an ongoing relationship. I don't think less of you as a person because you made a mistake. I'm here to help get you back on track. And that builds that confidence in them to move forward if there is a future and that they can feel confident to move forward. And then the last couple of bullet points there are really around strategies around empathy. And one of the most important strategies I want to share is to have a routine to set time aside for yourself to decompress. As you start to practice empathy, and if you're already practicing empathy, you'll validate that you know this to be true. As you experience the emotions of that other person and you feel what they feel, you take that onto yourself. And especially as a leader of a team, you're doing that for your whole team. So that's a lot of emotional labor that you're putting on yourself and you're carrying on your shoulders. So you've got to make sure to schedule time for self-care. I know in the healthcare industry, that's a big topic of self-care, what you're doing to look after yourself, schedule time for yourself to decompress, whether it's doing yoga, whether you're doing your walk or treadmill, whether you're just sitting and meditating or whatever it is that you like that gives you that decompression time. Make sure you schedule time for yourself. Because if you get yourself stressed out and maxed out with your own emotional labor, you're not going to be a great resource for your team. So that's probably one of the biggest strategies I recommend. And then helping your colleagues is another big one. Helping your colleagues identify the behaviors around empathy and how to practice that skill set. Because you as a team, the more that you're able to do it for each other, the more the peers are able to do it for each other. You're elevating the entire team's ability and skill sets as you do that. So again, just a quick couple tips and strategies there. Hopefully you find helpful as we move forward. And then the last slide for me is really talking about developing your skills. And if you go out and Google empathy, it's an amazing topic. You will find so much resources on empathy. And this is such an important topic. There are organizations out there that is their entire company is empathy. Like it's an empathyacademy.org out there. Like there are so many things around empathy you can find. But I did list a couple really great books out there that you can look up around empathy. Empathy strategies, the Soulful Leaders, a really great one. Anything around emotional intelligence is going to tie back to empathy for Daniel Goleman. The EQ 2.0 are all great resources. Strength Finders I've mentioned a couple of times, the EQ assessment tools from TTI. But then when we think about courses, I think one of the courses that's most actively missed when someone wants to develop the skill is an active listening course. There are a lot of different courses out about active listening and how to actually do this and how to practice it. And I think that's probably one of the most underutilized skill sets that goes with empathy. And I thought it was interesting when you looked on LinkedIn Learning, because I love free resources. I love free out there. There are 33 courses and 727 videos on LinkedIn just about empathy. So there's no reason that someone can't find resources to develop that skill set and even develop a partner, develop a peer. So whether it's yourself or someone in your team working on empathy, develop a peer and a partner to talk to say, hey, I'm working on this. Can you give me feedback and let me know how I'm doing? Share those experiences together. And it'll be an amazing experience. So just a couple quick tips out there for you to develop that skill. And the last thing we're going to do is on the website for PRS. As a takeaway from today, we're going to list a link to Laura Click, who put together a great list of 31 empathetic statements when you don't know what to say. So when you get faced with a situation that you need to have empathy, but you're not quite sure what to say, she's got a great list of scenarios and questions. So we'll provide a link on the PRS website for that to pull up as well as a resource.
Hey, thanks a lot, Al. And this is the final content slide that we have today before we get into any questions that you may have. So if you do have a question, feel free to write it in the chat box, and we're going to tackle that immediately following this final slide. What this is kind of a roundtable for the panelists to kind of talk about their final thoughts and summation on the long-term rewards that come from the regular practice of utilization of empathy. So, Tim, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Rich and Al.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. My theme through most of this presentation has been it's about the people. It's always about the people. When you invest in the people, the work product becomes, what it becomes. So one of the things that I didn't articulate earlier that I'd like to articulate now as we close this out is mastering the techniques of being empathetic also helps you master techniques about being aware, being noticeable, noticing others, and sensing in others. So imagine coming to work and just from the tone of voice or the look on the face or the non-verbal body language, you can immediately sense somebody's got an issue and somebody's got a challenge. And so you can approach them, you can have a conversation, how you doing? And you can start to have that conversation. Maybe it moves off, like has been suggested earlier, maybe it moves off into a quiet area. And the next thing you know, you've got in front of something. And now that ties back to what we're really all about, which is prevention. And so, yes, there are these skills that can help us respond. There are these skills we can employ that can help us manage through challenges. But as we get better at them, and as we evolve as leaders, we can begin to sense early. And in sensing early, we can get in front of things. There are so many outcome benefits to that, being at that level and operating at that level. People know you care. People know you have an interest in them. It becomes obvious. The loyalty meter and the engagement meter just go up. So when I look at this, I look at the ability to have those relationships to prevent, to resolve, and to help evolve. And it's one of the most important things that I think as leaders we can do is about caring for others. And then how do we institute that caring into techniques and skill sets? Thank you, Michael.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Rich?
Well said, Tim. I'll just add that when I look at this visual, I think it encapsulates everything that we've talked about in the last hour. How I'm going to interpret and the message I'll pass along to everybody is everybody holding hands in the middle. When we're doing that, we don't have to be concerned for our safety. If you're not practicing empathy, especially given the environment we find ourselves in today, you erode your safety. And so I really look at this in addition to everything that Tim and what I was going to say is as a critical safety measure as well, too. Al?
Absolutely. Thanks. Great call outs, everybody. And, I think to summarize it, people, my experience and also my academics of research and reading and studies, when there's empathy in the workplace and people feel the trust and they feel the loyalty and they feel you got their back as a leader, they're more willing to take the calculated risks, not crazy risks or doing silly things, but they're willing to step out of their comfort zone, expand their skill set, expand their ability, and they're willing to carry more for the organization when they know you trust them and they trust you, you've got their back, and you create a more stable environment of teams. And I think, Tim did a good point of calling this out earlier. People work for people work for organizations they believe in if they feel connected. And if there's not that connection, that's where you have the disjointed organization, you have the turnover, you have the slow productivities and all those negative things we talked about earlier. So there's a lot of benefits to having an empathetic workplace. At the end of the day, and I started out the beginning of our presentation today, 50% of most organizations, the teams are feeling stressed and anxious, and 60% are afraid to talk about it. So that's our responsibility as leaders. We have the opportunity to create a different future for our teams and our organizations. And it's our responsibility and it's our privilege to make a difference in our team's lives every day. So this is one of those skill sets that we are empowering ourselves to develop to go make that difference.
Yeah, well said.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you all, gentlemen, for participating here and giving your time very graciously to us today and sharing your experiences. This is the point where anybody who's on the line can ask questions of our panelists. I have a question, actually, for the group. and it's mainly geared for folks who might not have been able to join us here today. There's a lot of folks who transition from former law enforcement, maybe military organizations, into our industry, into our profession. For those folks who aren't familiar with the private sector, who come out of the public sector, what might be some of the challenges or surprises that you've encountered in your careers that kind of came upon you, and how you dealt with that, with, of course, an empathy slant, if you will, since that's our topic of conversation here today. But Rich, I know you came out about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, approximately. So why don't we start that off with you, if you don't mind?
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you. To me, three things come to mind. One is the private sector, when you come from the public sector, truly does not understand the skill set that's required in the public sector and how it is very relatable to whatever venture you're going into in the private sector. So that'd be the first thing. It's a hidden treasure in law enforcement, for example, and I know the military, leadership training, communication, those types of things are very high. So there's a lack of understanding that. Secondly, and this one's on us when we're transitioning, there is a tendency to be, from military law enforcement, for example, to be used to the world resolving around you. And in reality, you become one slice of the pie, especially if you transition into security. And you're no longer at the center of the universe, so to speak. And then I think really for me, the last point is coming from paramilitary, transitioning from that decision-making leadership paradigm to one of an influencer. The importance of building partnerships not based on rank. And not carrying out directives based on rank in the paramilitary model, coming more from a influential partnership approach, I think are the three areas to focus on from my experiences.
Yeah, and I know as an employer myself as well for my company, we've gone through a pretty diligent process with the assistance of Al over the last several years, and really defining specifically what we look for out of candidates for specific roles that we're looking to fill in. It's a little bit different for each role, of course, but the soft skills and empathy being one of them, those are one of the things I look for from candidates that are applying for jobs, how they interact, how they process things. Really important to me as an organization, because that's going to translate directly out in the field or at the front line, so to speak. Tim, any additional thoughts, comments, questions on that particular subject matter?
Yeah, the biggest one, I'm absolutely not going to share how long it's been since I got out of the Navy and served in the submarine force, but it was a long time ago, and we'll just leave it at that. But through my career, I have had the honor and the experience of bringing in people from law enforcement or ex-military into roles into my organizations. And the biggest thing, the number one thing that I will talk about is how to help them understand culture alignment. So the culture of companies, heck, when we go from company to company, we have to figure out the culture. When I came to ROKU, I had to figure out the ROKU culture, much different than anything else I'd ever been in. And imagine coming from a career in military or law enforcement, and now you have to understand, is this a great place to work environment, or is this a get the job done and don't complain environment, right? And they're all out there. And so cultural alignment, understanding it, evaluating it, aligning to it, and shifting to it equals success. If you break down in that model anywhere, you're not going to be successful. And I will say that over my career, I've had about a 50% success rate of being able to help people evolve into a different culture and be successful within it.
Absolutely. It's not easy. I know that, especially if you've been in one mindset for, say, 20 years.
Yeah.
That's hard to do. Al, any comments on the question?
Yeah, I don't have the law enforcement and military background that Rich and Tim have, which is amazing. But as a private security sector person who's hired military throughout my career. Tim kind of stepped right on where I was going with my thoughts it's that culture transition, and also understanding in a lot of organizations there's more gray than there is black and white sometimes. So sometimes there's a struggle to go from the black and white that's clear to kind of what does that gray look like, and learning to manage within the gray. So I think that's where having that empathy to say, I know this is what you're used to. Let me help you make that transition into our culture and how that looks. And what does that relationship look like? And that's part of the onboarding process, I think, too, is as you go into the onboarding and that talent selection piece and you're onboarding that person, and they have this unique skill set, this amazing experience you're bringing in, but there's this one little element you think they could potentially use some help. How do we set them up for success? How do you have those touch bases? How do you ask them, how are you feeling about working here? Is there anything you see that you're struggling with? And, having those opportunities for them to share and for you to help guide them. So I think that would be the other piece I would add, and it's just set up for a successful onboarding.
Sure. And we do have a question from Robbie. Robbie, go ahead and unmute yourself if you would, and feel free to ask your question.
Hi, folks. So my question is, kind of what Tim was going off of and Rich. So when you come from a background, like you folks have come from more heavy law enforcement backgrounds, or we're in the security management industry, and it tends to be kind of cutthroat, kind of that black and white type of industry where, it's a job, you get it done. But based on your experience, how do we merge kind of this idea of empathy, move forward with kind of a compassionate leadership stance, and also, move forward with kind of, the way that security kind of standards are usually set in stone? How do you continue to kind of evolve with your leadership and helping your staff and every single person kind of help develop that empathy, that understanding? How do you recommend that, especially for someone like me, kind of, in this industry, like how do you continue to foster that in other people on your team and people that you meet?
Robbie, great question. Let me jump in because I think Tim's going to have the better answer. For me, I was very fortunate. I had a leadership influential background anyway. The department I worked in valued that. So I got a lucky break, but didn't even know it. And I think one word that comes to mind, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim, is humble. Being humble, understanding that there's a lot to learn from a cultural aspect. There's a lot of bridges to cross. Every position I've taken, I've committed to being a good student first. Then I'll be a security director next. So I think coming from that perspective is vitally important.
Well, thanks, Rich. Yeah, Robbie, that's a great question, and I'm going to step out here and I'm going to take a risk. Anybody that knows me knows that I've said this before. One of the detriments of our industry is that it is very slow to evolve, and anybody that doesn't want to look at that is definitely got their head in the sand. We are slow to evolve, and this right here, what we're doing, this is the start. I have never heard of anybody in our industry talking about this in a formal way. So this is the start. This is the beginning. The question now is, how do we keep it going? We get this message out. I plan to, share it within ROKU, maybe even get it onto our leadership, onto our learning management system, certainly with my team and our organization. And it's a start. We need to continue this dialogue. We need to share this dialogue with our colleagues who we know may not be the best empathetic people in the world, but they're the ones we need to talk to first and next. And so this is a start. We got to keep it going, but our industry does need to evolve, and it's going to take a new mindset to help make that happen.
Yeah, Robbie, I agree with that as well. And that's what I was going to add. First and foremost is raising awareness. And one of the ways to do that is by sharing, this type of a message continually with new hires, the rest of your team, in perpetuity, not necessarily making it a one-day discussion, just continually evolving that. And of course, you have the resources, that Al was very kind to share with us earlier in our presentation as well. So having some formal training process and then adopting that to your training process and onboarding process, that would be really helpful to the end goal as well.
And if I can jump in real quick too, I think what I would add to what everybody shared would be recognizing the behavior. So when you see it displayed, when you see someone using empathy, it's okay to recognize that behavior and say, hey, I noticed how you handled X situation. I really appreciate how you did that. Thank you for doing that. Something as simple as that is a reinforcement of the behavior. And then I think the other thing, to Tim's point, the evolution of the industry, showing empathy is not a weakness. There's this perception sometimes that you have to be this strong, stoic individual that doesn't have emotions. And that's not necessarily the truth. There's a lot of extremely successful people in our industry that have empathy and can show emotion. So I think part of it is, to Tim's point, evolving the thought process a little bit, that it's okay to have emotions. That doesn't make you weak or a bad thing. So I think getting rid of that stigma a little bit is helpful too.
Hopefully that was helpful, Robbie. I don't see any other questions at this time, but this is an last opportunity to do so. And short of any other questions, I will put up my contact information. Let us know if you have any questions. You feel free to reach out, whether it be phone or email is fine. Brian said thank you. Thanks for being here, Brian. Appreciate it. We'll be sure to share the link through our company website here once we get the final download and all ready. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time and attention. Have a great day.